Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls. Welcome to part two of my horror psychology series. It's not actually a psychology series. Please excuse me if I cough a little bit. I have a stiffness in my chest. But let's begin, shall we? As of right now, this is called Horror versus Fear versus Terror. Now, if you watched my previous video, we talked about different archetypes and genres of horror. But no matter which archetype of game you're going to pick, you're going to need to know both how to properly set a scare and the differences between the different types of um, scares. Um, well, the difference between fear and horror is that horror is more of a general feeling of uneasiness and unsettling. It's incomprehensible and intangible. These types of things are often found within eldritch beings, such as like H.P. Lovecraft stuff. Bigger examples, more wide, is ghosts, general mythos, and cults. Fear, however, it's not the same. It's oftentimes a one-up and gives a nice jump in your heart. I personally fall for fear tricks because, one, they tend to be set up pretty well, and two, they're a nice, cute little trick. Now, a few example of these fear tricks is that there are a few. Maybe one moment from the top of my head. Bodies falling from the ceiling, Fred entering in the left door, Power Drill Massacre Sugar Tunnel, need I say any more? Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with fear tricks, but they should be combined with something else. They shouldn't be the sole form of horror in your game. There was another game, I can't remember what it was called, it was something like Trenches or something, but they used only fear tricks. They had no other suspense, and it was quite boring and quite annoying. And also, I have no idea what the goal of that game at all was. But in another horror game that also used a fear trick, they used a dark hallway that you couldn't, it was pitch black. And an old video game trick is that you look back to the light source to see if you're making progress. Well, the game abused this and put a jump scare there of a hand darting away. Now, I wish I remembered the name of that game, but it was a nice thing that I really enjoyed. Now, going into jump scares, there's specific ways to set them up properly so you avoid falling pitfalls. Me and my friend, we get in this debate a lot about jump scares. She doesn't believe in jump scares. I, however, on the other hand, very much believe in them, but you gotta set them up. Now, the proper way to set up a jump scare is you build up tension with horror and mythos and all those types of things. My apologies. And then when they're all tense, you cut them horror in the music and you hit them like Bronson. Now, I will completely talk about fear tricks in a completely separate video because there's so much content to cover about it that I could go on at least for 10 minutes to talk about several different types of fear tricks, how to abuse psychology for it. But this is more talking about the differences between horror, terror, and fear. So, yeah. Sorry, I zoned out there. Uh, Now, horror as a whole often creates subgenres, but I'm also going to put that aside for a little bit later and talk more about the stylistic things that you can do to build up horror and tension. Um, let's bring in some examples here. Puppet Combo tends to use these a lot, VHS Static, and the concept of hearing legends. Uh, in hearing legends, you oftentimes hear about, say, this serial killer. Let's take a moment and think to the Easter Bunny Massacre. They set it up by talking so much about this character, this Easter Bunny, that killed people, and they began to have that lore built up so that it's so messed up you know what's going on. So it's not just some Easter Bunny with a knife. Now, more ways to do tension is body horror, which is I find body horror a bit disgusting, but some people find it absolutely terrifying. Gotham had it for their season 2 with Fish and Mooney. That was a nice little body horror. Stalking is a big one. You notice this a lot in older age horror movies, but it can be especially good in video games. And stalking is maybe it's a fear trick. I'd have to think more about that. But you basically have take Michael Myers for example, the infamous scene in Halloween 1 where Michael Myers appears, it fades to what's her name looking out at him, and then Michael Myers disappears without her breaking eye contact. Yes, fucking hilarious. But no, that's stalking because stalking can often be more terrorizing for, say, realism stuff, which is actually the next video I'm going to cover. So please stay tuned and leave a like and subscribe if you want to hear about my next chapter of this saga. Now let's talk about some more of the other ways of tension, which are phobias, scary images, and superstition. I'm going to lump all three of these together because they kind of fall into place. Actually, no, that was a mistake. Phobias, let's talk about those first. Phobias are specific to each person. It's classified as an irrational fear to something that shouldn't be scary. Like pillow phobia or something. Some people have it because of past trauma. I typically would try to avoid using this in a game unless you're specifically making the game about that phobia. Or if your main character has that phobia due to prior experiences. It can also often more so be used for lore building, which is actually so much better. Now, scary images. This can be both horror and terror. Because a scary image can mean, say, that game where you bring a red dot around and you get to the end and the scary image pops up. That's a scary image, whereas terror would be more in the range of, say, the Backrooms, which I will talk about later. Superstition. Now, I think it was Batman that said this. Keep in mind, my quotes are pretty off. But the root of all fear is superstition. Something along those lines. Everything that we do culture-wise is typically built upon superstition. Why do we not have a 13th floor on most skyscrapers? You know what I mean there? So you can use superstition of commonly held ones in order to give people generally that bad vibes. We tend to type... oh, God. We tend to think of rules of three as well. Well, rules of three can be both positive and negative, but typically that's such a reoccurring thing, and people tend to think, depending on the connotation, that it is negative. Now, regarding superstition, majority of the population is superstitious, and game developers can use and abuse this quite a lot. And superstition also ties into things being intangible. Majority of people don't like things that can't be explained. Like, you may think that, oh, I'm okay with things that can't be explained. Bullshit. You're definitely not okay with things that can't be explained. This was why some of the more popular horror movies, such as Sinister, As Above, So Below, and the Conjuring franchises, all feature supernatural elements. That's why they're so popular, is because we can't directly explain them, and also because the directors kind of have a little bit of leeway with just saying, oh, it's just what ghosts can do. Now, let's talk about terror. I know, I've built up to this for a decent bit of time, so please hold your applause, my friends. And it's an illegal, not talked about thing within game development, but it was talked about in a quote that I remember reading, and I was like, I should probably cover this at least a little bit. Terror is not just fear, it's not just horror. Terror will leave a long-lasting imprint on your life. Terror will make you sit down and be afraid of something just by thinking of the subject. It's the most powerful one, but it's simply the most difficult one to get around. But it can be done. It's very difficult to do, especially with being in on a computer or a TV screen. Terror is something that's more physical than anything else. But it can be possible to pull out into a game or movie. It well, what's an example of this that I can pull for you guys? Alfred Hitchcock. Actually, there's a couple of them, but I'm going to talk about Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock is a very interesting thing. I'm going to talk about Psycho because I do know about that one. I think it's called Psycho. It's been a little bit. But the way his philosophy always worked is show what's going to happen before it happens. So the audience has that sense of terror. It invokes a feeling that I like to call dread, which is tension to the limits. You know what's going to happen. You just have to wait for it to happen in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. That's why it's good, because it builds extreme tension. And it has it had such an imprint on my life that I generally have an uneasy feeling at motels, but I'm not sure if that's just a general thing that people have. Let me know if you guys get upset by hotels. But on the topic of dread, which is I'm calling it tension, but pushing it far, far, far to the limits. And there are a few ways to invoke it, and I'm going to talk about the first one, because that's the one that I know best. So, dread can often be caused by something very familiar to you, such as an old school house or something that you know well. But something is off. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but think about it this way. If you're sitting in your house, no, not your house, if you're sitting, say, in the mall, normally when you go to the mall, it is bright, orderly, lots of people there. Everyone around you is bustling and booming. But if you're sitting in a mall and it's dark and it's practically empty, that, my friend, is going to invoke a feeling of dread and familiarity. Because it's something that you should know, not something that let me rephrase that. Your expectations are not meeting the reality. Now, a good example of something that really invokes dread is basically the Backrooms. Oh, sorry, I have asthma, for context, if you guys didn't know that. Actually, no, why would you know that? I only have one other video out. But no, back on the topics of the Backrooms, it's a place that seems familiar. It's the long, winding, claustrophobic corridors seem familiar to where you've been. You know what it should look like. But the longer and longer you travel in the back rooms to the exact same place, it becomes more terrifying. The back rooms also will prey on general superstition and phobias as well, because it has that supernatural feel and element to it with the entities within it. By the way, I only believe in Backrooms Level 0. Screw you all. Yeah, and it preys upon the general claustrophobic phobia, because those hallways, from what I've been looking into about it, are claustrophobic. They are small and windy, and you feel like you can get lost. Now, this might just go into a video of me talking about the madness behind the back rooms, like, if you were actually in the back rooms, how maddening it would be. Yeah. I should probably stop it here before I go into that tangent. I need to stop going on tangents. But anyway, if you guys do want to see me sit here and monologue for 20 something minutes about the backrooms, leave a like or comment.